There we go. Hello, and welcome to the 6th in our series of audio-enabled EDA Step Workshop sessions. We're glad you're here. My name is Annette, and I'm in full recovery from an eating disorder. Before we get started, a few caveats. This session of the EDA Step Workshop is being recorded. We hope to make audio recordings of the workshop accessible to everyone. Please note that these audios will not be available. Oops, hang on, I'm gonna page up here a second. Hold on, we're looking at the agenda, and that was a little bit sooner than I'd planned to. Here we go. Okay, so this session is being recorded, and we hope to make audio recordings of the workshop accessible to everyone. Please note that these audios will not be available on the EDA website until they've gone through the full vetting process. We will, however, be sending information about the recordings to the General Service Board email distribution list. If you're not currently on that list, please drop a line to info@eatingdisordersanonymous.org and we'll get you added. Reminder, listening to a recording is not a substitute for attending EDA meetings or working the steps. We encourage you to check out our meetings pages, which include face-to-face, online, and teleconference meetings. Just like what you might hear at an EDA group, what you're about to experience reflects our individual experience, strength, and hope, and may not tally real well with what your own experiences are. Please take what you can use and leave the rest. You do not need a sponsor to attend this workshop. We will all be working the steps of EDA together, myself included. To make things easier for everyone, we've muted everyone as they join. If you'd like to be heard, please unmute your phone by using *6 or Alt-A if you're on a computer. You can mute and unmute using the same key combination. Because there are so many of us, we won't all get a chance to introduce ourselves. However, if you're speaking, please do tell us your first name and where you're from. Last week, we discussed Appendix B, pages 490 through 499, and pages 124 through 131, Step 3. We talked a little bit about the purpose of surrender, opening ourselves up to sanity, usefulness, and an unknown freedom. We reflected on how using the third step, prayer and commitment, can help us establish and maintain balance. So we talked a little bit also about what balance meant to us. We had a panel that picked up a few questions. And tonight, we're actually moving on to Step 4. Exciting stuff. You who have joined are hardcore. You deserve a lot of credit. Yay! Just for showing up. This is a scary step. And so one of the things we talked about was actually looking at maybe Step 10 as an introduction to some of the same basic processes that we go through in Step 4. Step 10, which is took a searching and fearless continue to take moral inventory of ourselves and promptly admitted it when we were wrong, is covered in pages 186 to 192 and 517 to 521. Also on workshop worksheet pages 32 and 33. For tonight's meeting, we're going to be really focusing on Step 4 for the most part, which is Chapter 5, pages 132 to 158, and Appendix D, pages 526 through 543. So today we're going to talk to a few people, and I'd like to check and see who's actually on the call so that we can get a roster of the folks who sponsor. Now, this does not necessarily mean that you're offering to sponsor the people on the call today. If you're open to that, please do identify yourself. We'd be happy to take your information and get you on our sponsors list. And then we have people that dial in and actually ask for sponsors from sponsors at eatingdisordersanonymous.org. So if you're looking for a sponsor, you can write that number, or if you are somebody who's willing to sponsor, same email address, sponsors@eatingdisordersanonymous.org. So if you are currently sponsoring and would like to be identified so that we can call on you for as a panelist, please identify yourself now and let us know your name and your city.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm in Covington, Louisiana, and I sponsor.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, I'm Emily in Phoenix, Arizona, and I sponsor. I'm in recovery.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, I'm Ellen, and I'm recovered from an eating disorder, and I'm calling from Texas.
Hi, Ellen. Thank you for joining. In the room, we have me, Annette. I'm in full recovery from an eating disorder. I'm from Phoenix.
I'm Giselle, and I'm in full recovery from an eating disorder from Maricopa.
I'm Sally, and I live in Scottsdale.
Hi, Sally. Glad you're all here. All right, so tonight, and if you haven't been identified and you do want to be identified and you were muted because you didn't do Alt A or *6, you're welcome to join us as we progress, so as we get through the step. So tonight, I was wondering if anybody, like I know Nuria was hoping to be able to join. Nuria is actually in Florida, she's in Charlotte, and they're having terrible storms. She doesn't have power and her phone is dying. So I don't believe we're going to get Nuria tonight. I know Michelle did prepare, and so Michelle, I know that you were prepared to talk about Step 4, but I don't know if you were prepared to talk about the readings, but I'm going to check in with you and see if you'd like to get us started or if you'd like us to call on you later.
Hi. Yeah, no, I actually had kind of prepared a little bit in terms of a summary of what I had written before. So I could kind of try to wing it, but I actually didn't even print out the section of the email. So maybe I should pass in terms of somebody else who might be better prepared.
Sure. Well, is there anybody else that would like to start up? Because I do think that we have a lot of folks that have full recovery or have wisdom to share on how to work these steps, and we haven't all worked them the same way. So the first thing we were going to talk about, like I know a lot of people came from other 12-step programs, and some of the ways that EDA works Step 4 and some of the other steps is a little bit different, but they're basically all the same steps, and we want to really drive home that point. If you've worked steps in other programs, it's not like that is invalidated or inapplicable here. It's actually perfectly applicable. There's some things here that we go in, we cut at it in a different angle, and we're going to talk about that today and for the next 3 sessions. But so to get us started, I did want to cover what most people have done. Like in the beginning of EDA, Giselle and I really didn't use the way that the AA text was written to do our steps forwards exactly, because some of it just felt really like it was all heavy and it was really focused on like everything that we did wrong, and that's true. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is that in the AA text on page 69, it does talk a lot about the resolution. You know, it includes the statements that are specific about what we do to outline what we should have done instead, and we ask God to help us to help show the way. So what we're doing in the EDA text is really identical. It's just that we explicitly drag that out because we think that it's important for us to lay out and to think about what we should have done in every case. And so a key part of what we want to talk about tonight is how to lay that out. Tonight, we're going to start with page 138 and actually 132, I'm sorry, Step 4. The key reason that we take Step 4, which is a difficult step, if you're dialed in to participate in this, we take our hats off to you. And I'm going through this again just because I think it's really important to keep it fresh. And it's not like I'm ever really like have nothing to work on. And the 10th step keeps me in line for a good part of a year or so usually, but it gets stale too because it doesn't really dig deep enough in some of these areas. And I want to keep growing. Step 4 is a thing that really helps point out the areas in which I'm still stuck, and it gives me things to work on, and the rest of the steps give me the way to work on them. So on page 132, in the middle of the page, it says, since we can never be fully effective in serving our God, our higher power, or a higher purpose if we're operating from a place of instability and unreliability, we can hardly hope to be successful in honoring our commitment to honoring the commitment we just made in Step 3, unless we're willing to expose and let go of the fears and issues that caused us to want to use and escape in the first place. And well, like I haven't used an eating disorder to escape in a long time, but that doesn't mean I don't have busyness and I don't have things that I allow to kind of get in the way of me being the best person I can be and focused on how I can carry the message and being of service to my family and community as well as I might. And I've noticed that a lot lately. You know, it's not necessarily like I make a purposeful decision like, hey, I'm going to make it all about me now. I don't ever do that, but it happens. So this step keeps me honest. Another thing I wanted to point out on page 133, we have to accept that as independent adults, we're responsible for our own well-being. we have to get our own basic physical and safety needs met before we can make a lot of progress in relationships of trust. And that includes the trust relationship that we have with God, a higher power, or a higher purpose. I'm not going to really make a lot of changes and have the courage to like really bust out of my patterns of however it is, unless I'm really willing to take care of my basics. And that means primary relationships. Like you look at Maslow's hierarchy of need, and honestly, that's really about recognizing that human beings have fundamentals, that if we're not taking care of things like sleep and food and sex and primary relationships and things that give us a sense of purpose, we are not able to break out of and to commit ourselves to achieve self-actualization or be of greater service to the greater good if we cannot calm down. So we're too anxious if we don't have those basic needs met. And man, that's like me a lot, actually. So even if I'm, many decades of recovery, that doesn't, that sounds like an exaggeration. I've got 32 years of recovery in another program and about 16 now in EDA. And I am really delighted to be here and to have this opportunity to share about this need to take care of basics. If I got here knowing how to eat, we never would have had EDA, right? Or it's like Giselle might have, but I wouldn't have. And I gotta say that, this need to take care of basics, it's like I forget it. I do. It's like I take it for granted, and I just don't always do the stuff that I'm supposed to do, even now. And so I'm constantly having to kind of make myself toe the line. It's like, oh yeah, oh right, yeah, no, actually, and that means sometimes that I have to play, because it's like that sense of levity and joy. If I'm not really taking care of basics, then I become very grim. Yeah. So EDA reminds us to keep things in balance and to keep things light. That's one of the things that we do a little bit different about Step 4. Step 10 is important because it reminds us, our practice of Step 10 includes not just a gratitude list, but looking at what we're doing right, what's positive and right in our lives. And that's partially what we choose that's good and right and positive, and reminding ourselves of those milestones. So first things first, we have to take care of those basics. On page 134, we have to confront basic truths. We get stuck, and we ended up with an eating disorder for many, many reasons. They met some of those basic needs we have. They didn't meet them in a terribly good way, but they did meet some of the needs. Our need for expression, our need for self-soothing, for comfort. They met basic needs. And until we find a better way to deal with the things that make us feel uncomfortable and awkward and wrong and angry and resentful, until we find a better way, we're going to keep relying on our eating disorders, or we're going to keep relying on old patterns that keep us stuck in ways of behaving that we just don't really want to do anymore. So, even if you're not feeling like, well, I'm mentally unstable and insane now, and I don't feel like that anymore. But when I look at my patterns and I think, gosh, is it really necessary for me to be doing something every night of the week when my husband's retired and I don't know how long he's going to live? It's not like he's about to die, but I really probably wouldn't make some of the choices I make today if I was really being thoughtful. There's always ways in which we can grow. So, on page 134, near the end of the last paragraph, it says, we lacked the peace and power to stay focused on what really mattered because we were caught up in our emotional reactions to life, people, places, situations, and things. We also lacked an objective, empathetic perspective that would have made our normal human problems seem manageable. As adults, we find little has changed. So as kids, a lot of times we're connected to these ideas of what really matters. And I cared a lot about social problems and about pollution. And it's like I was really motivated about those things. But, as I grew into an adolescent and even as an adult, I get caught up in things that maybe don't matter so much. And so that problem is identified as we were stuck in the center of the storm at the bottom of the page. Well, what's the answer to that? Carl Jung described it as a critically necessary emotional displacement and rearrangement, which is that fundamental transformation we talk about in step 12. Well, what gets us to step 12? All the rest of these steps. And so the idea of this fundamental transformation is the heart of 12-step recovery. And that's what we talk about on page 135. So we have to look at things from a different frame of reference. And when we look at our problems, we now need to recognize that these are the things that are both the key to how to react differently to life, because these are really fundamentally us grappling with life as it presents itself to us. So it's not like this is some like horrible, it's actually like our tremendous opportunity to figure out how it is that we are getting our needs met and think of different ways that we can do it that enables us to get more of what we really need and want to be able to do to be people of dignity and integrity in life. So what we now need is to put it to practical use. This new perspective that we developed in step 3, where we were thinking about, well, you know what? I want to be different. I want to respond differently to life. I don't like my old patterns. Even if they're not going to kill you, like nothing I'm doing right now is going to kill me, but it's really affecting my relationship with my mother, with my son, with my husband in ways that could be better. They're not terrible. They could be better. So anyway, the phrase use it or lose it has a very real and urgent meaning at this point, and that's really true, because if I'm going to look to what does it really mean to rely on something bigger than myself, to put things into perspective, to make sure I'm really putting my time, talent, and love into the things that matter, like work probably isn't going to be it. I'll tell you. And it's not like work doesn't matter, it matters a ton, but does it matter as much as my primary relationships? And the answer is no, because those are the things that are going to carry on long after I'm dead. All right, so once we regain a sane perspective, we begin to see how we can use all of these things about us that we may not have liked, our traits and talents. We can put all that stuff to good use. We may be afraid, and we may have failed many times before. Maybe it's been painful, but we must explore what's been blocking us from real progress. That's what step 4 is all about, uncovering and beginning to address whatever is really causing the emotional distress that fueled our eating disorders in the past. So in the AA text, it calls these problems that we experience as a result of resorting to techniques that don't really work as the hideous 4 horsemen: terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. The more we use our eating disorders or our broken ways of thinking, the more we experience these impediments, and it just makes them worse. So it's like the more we try to solve our problem with our broken process, the more problems we get. So we know that we're on the right path when the problems start to diminish. It doesn't mean that they disappear overnight, because they're not gonna. I mean, this is a lengthy process, not an event. And that's what we get in EDA. So we're gonna skip a bunch of stuff here, but we have to get down to causes and conditions. The AA text tells us that, and so does the EDA. Main steps of step 4 are to establish a list of flaws in our thinking and to define a new plan of action. That's really key. That new plan of action is exactly how we're going to act, not react. And that's that resolution column. When we get to describing how to do this, we'll talk about that. Now, there's different ways of doing the 4-step. Some sponsors still have people doing 4-step the way it's described in the AA text, and that is actually perfectly fine. The main things that is different about EDA is focusing not so much on exactly how broken we are, but on what we want to do right. And that's where we're asking, just like it says in the AA text, on what should we have done instead. It says that in the section on the sex inventory in the AA text, and we don't actually have a separate sex inventory in the EDA text because sex can appear anywhere. I mean, I can have shame and self-pity and frustration and despair about anything. So sex is just one topic of many. All right, so the 8 topics that we're talking about here include resentment, fear, self-pity, all of which actually appear in the AA text as well. Self-pity is mentioned, although not really called out specifically. The new things include shame. Guilt or harms done does appear in the AA text, but not really as a separate list. Confusion, frustration, and despair, those come right out of those hideous horsemen, because you know what? I did not recover from my eating disorder until I was willing to look very explicitly at all 8 of these impediments. And you know what? It isn't like these are necessarily all distinct. Some of it is just the same as it was from the other angles. I mean, I might be resentful about the very same thing that I'm frustrated with, but I could be totally frustrated with myself without really resenting myself. And so there were things that appeared in the frustration and confusion column that I didn't have any fear or resentment around. So new and different things. So we're just cutting it at a slightly different angle. Another thing that's a little bit different about the EDA way of working this stuff is that we, in the AA text, it's thorough and thoroughgoing inventory. It is the same in the EDA approach. However, most sponsors limit people to about the first 10 or 15 items on the list in each of the categories, because otherwise we never finish. And it's like, you know what, this is intended to point out patterns. We're working at the 4-step. What we find are tons of patterns, and we want to get over it. So it doesn't really help to go and look at every single relationship I've ever had in my life. Honestly, that's going to it becomes this litany of woe, and it doesn't really move me forward in a helpful process until I can get to steps 5, 6, 7, and 8. So what I think is really important about this step is for you to work with somebody that is confident in their approach, hopefully somebody that's in good recovery or has made significant progress in their recovery, and to relax, because you know what, there is no single one right way. There are many, many good ways to work this stuff, and there's also a few ways that don't really work so much. I certainly practiced a few of those myself, and I'm going to tell you about one. So early in my recovery, about 4 years into my recovery from alcoholism, I was caught up in a resentment that I couldn't seem to fix, and I knew it was trouble. I could see it. It was like it was starting to overtake my life. It was growing, and it was like a cancer, and I could feel it, and I knew I had to work the steps. And I worked with a sponsor, and she explained how to work the step 4, and I dutifully did my best. Because the first time I'd done a step 4, it was really super simple. I basically, I made a list in my head, not even on paper. And I turned to the guy next to me after the meeting and I said, "Hey, you got a minute? I got to talk to you. I got to talk to somebody about all these things that I've done wrong." And that was my 4th or 5th. And you know what? It worked because it was honest. I didn't hold anything back. I was fearless. It was thorough. I talked about all those horrible things that I had done and why. And honestly, it was freeing. But when I got caught up with that resentment, I did exactly the opposite. I was ashamed at what a crappy job I thought I had done with that first, 4th, and 5th step, and I tried to follow the book. One book was the AA text. Another book was a Hazelden thing. There were all these helpful, handy books that would explain to you how to work this stuff, but I was clueless because I was so caught up in this resentment I couldn't see straight. And so I wrote reams. I wrote 3 notebooks full of crap that was really like every single person that I had ever had a relationship with, and how they had done me wrong and how I had done them wrong, and it was just like this. It was a horrible mess. Okay, and it took me nearly a day to give it away when I did a 5th step, and the lady just patted my hand, and it was a sponsor. She just patted my hand. You poor thing. I'm sorry, but that did not work. It did not help me. I did not go back into my eating disorder until after that was over, but I did, because it didn't solve a thing, because there wasn't anything in there about what's the resolution. There wasn't anything in there that really freed me or helped me do a better job of trusting that which was greater than me. So my main hope in conveying step 4 to people is keep it simple. Okay, keep it simple. Look for the patterns. Where are we caught up? What's the error in our thinking? And really make it about what we want to do differently in these relationships going forward. And that's really not so hard. If we write 10 things in each 8 of these columns, that's 80 items that we have to work on. That's a lot. So that's enough, and it's thoroughgoing enough for any 4-step, in my personal opinion. But that's just me. And so I'm actually going to briefly explain the brainstorming process, and then we're going to turn it over to Michelle or to anybody else that actually would like to talk about, because I've been talking for this long time. But so maybe it'd be better to just turn it over to others who want to share about their experiences with step 4 before we actually look at the resentment example starting on page 141. Anybody?
Hey, it's Michelle. I'm in recovery from an eating disorder. I did actually want to share a couple things, like just touching quickly upon some of the reading. I mean, I know you covered a lot of it. One of the things that really helped me is to it feels so daunting, right? And so if I look at this as an extension of my step 3, right? Like I make a decision, and the way I make that decision and carry it out in step 3 is by doing the rest of the work. And all this is for me was what I really love I like the idea of context, giving me new context, and that was referred to in the meeting, in the reading. But what I really love too is on the top of page 137, where it reads, "This might seem like a lot of work, but let us assure you it can be completed in a relatively short time. You probably spend more time in your escapist engagement with your eating disorder each week that is required to complete this exercise." I know I did. "We are convinced you will find it extremely useful because you will refer to your inventory and all the remaining steps." So this for me was just another tool for recovery. It wasn't me turning my inside out. It wasn't me analyzing analysis paralysis, going through every nook and cranny. You know what I mean? This was building a tool for recovery. And I really love the fourth step. I really love it. And for me, I just have to say it was an incredibly freeing process. So I just wanted to say that just because not so much I didn't get feeling hopeless from anything I've heard so far, not at all. But I've just known so many people who felt like this is such a daunting process, but it's really so worth it. It's so worth it, and it's not that daunting. And what happened for me is that I got momentum. For me, I had to do trial and error and see what worked for me. Sometimes, you know, I could spend an hour where writing, but I never set that as a goal. To me, if I spent 5 minutes a day doing it, that was 5 minutes a day I got to do it. You know what I mean? I didn't need to have it be one more expectation that I set up myself for of not doing something good enough, right? It just needed to be good enough. And like the bar is like really low. Like all I need to do is bring my whole heart and try and do the best I can. And then it gets done. And like I said, what happened for me is that I gained momentum and it became something that gave me relief. So at first it was kind of hard because it brought up a lot of painful memories, but like I just pushed through it. And then I started feeling relief, incredible relief. So I just wanted to share that real quick because it's kind of based on the reading. And I can share about different four-step stuff later so other people have a chance to share. But I just really wanted to share that for me it was inventory is an incredibly positive experience. It's a time where I get to spend with my higher power. And that's all I wanted to share.
Michelle, thank you so much. Ellen, would you care to share?
Sure, I'll share. You know, I really like the format of EDA's four-step. I also come from a background of being in other 12-step fellowships, and so you know, I had worked the fourth-step and in a number, well, in a couple different ways, both in AA and then also in Al-Anon. But you know, one of the things that was so incredibly helpful in, you know, EDA is that not just the fact that we have that fourth column where we look at our part, but that fifth column, you know, where I get to have, you know, where it's that resolution column. And I like where it says on page 137 that, you know, one of the main points of the fourth-step exercise is to define a new plan of action for how we would like to respond to each familiar provocation in the future. We are planning exactly how we will act, not react. And, you know, for so much of my life, it was, you know, it was all about reaction and, you know, not responding. And, you know, when I was in the middle of my eating disorder, you know, everything was all about, you know, how I could, you know, stuff my emotions and, you know, and, you know, I had no idea how to deal with life in an effective and responsible way. And when I got to do the fourth step, and I actually got to, put down on paper and see what the errors in my thinking were, and what the errors in my action were, and then I could actually have hope to be able to change, then that became really freeing, because there was a possibility to be able to do something different. And anyway, I just I'm really grateful for EDA and just for the process of the steps and the work. I really, for me, I believe that the healing is in the steps. So anyway, that's what I've got. Thanks.
Thank you, Ellen. Really appreciate that. I'm going to call on Emily.
There.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
You were calling on somebody else?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, my name is Bonnie, and I'm relatively new to EDA, but a long-timer in other programs. I've been trying to work the steps of my life for over 41 years now in AA and OA and Al-Anon and, on and on. The thing about fourth step for me is that it's not so much whether or not you do it right, it's doing it. All the steps are like that for me. It's most of the changes in my life that have occurred as a result of trying to work the steps in whatever is happening in my life today. And I've found that one of the things that happens is that life puts in front of me the lesson I need. And if I pay attention to what's going on in my life and just try to work the steps the way they're written or the way I understand them at that moment, and my understanding of the steps has changed a lot over the years. You walk in, you've got a paradigm of thinking that closes you to other ideas and other ways of doing things, and you try to work the steps, and eventually you do. That paradigm changes, but then I don't know, it keeps changing. I've had at least 2 dramatic events of spiritual awakening, and the last one put me on a high where I was abstinent, or not abstinent in this program, but free of my compulsive eating behavior for a period of about 2.5 years before I came down off that high and started struggling again and now I'm getting back into the nitty gritty. So I think that's all.
Thank you, Bonnie. I love that you pointed out that, the way we approach this is not rigid. And that's one of the key things about EDA is we really make a significant effort to accept people where they are and to work forward, because we do end up with full recovery, but we get there through a process that's just rigorously honest. And the result is that we have more resilience perhaps than we might if we were less accepting. We assume that people really, we're growing in the right direction if we keep opening ourselves up to what is. And so as long as we're continuing to be honest with ourselves and willing to put ourselves out there on the firing line, doing the next right thing, it's going to get better as long as we're open with ourselves and focusing on what's going right. And that is such a key part of looking at the fourth step in EDA, as we do focus on that resolution piece, which Ellen pointed out. We have a few more minutes before we move on to the specifics of laying out the worksheets, because I don't know if everybody did all the readings, because I went through the readings myself this week, and I got to tell you, it was a lot of reading. But so we looked at step 10 first, as a sort of an intro, because it's laid out in exactly the same way as we do step 4, with the addition of that focusing on what's going right, so the positives, looking at our own decisions that support recovery, and also looking at a little bit of a goal. So not just the resolution, but thinking in terms of what we could do that would help ourselves recognize the positive impact we have on the world just by virtue of being a human being out there looking to help others. So it was a lot of reading, and I don't know if everybody looked at the worksheets, but on pages 6 to 9 on the worksheets, it lays out the format for stuff. Well, it talks a little bit about the brainstorming process, and it begins to introduce how we are going to look at the resentment example. So before we turn to page 141 and start going through that, I wanted to give people an opportunity to comment on specifically their experiences in EDA. And so thank you to Ellen and Bonnie. Emily, do you have anything to share, or Sally or Giselle? Okay.
Is it anything to share? Sorry. Oh, I am here.
Go ahead.
Were you asking if I had anything to share on specifically EDA Step Four?
Yeah, or your other experiences working other formats in EDA, that would be fine too.
Sure, I'll share real quick. I'm really happy to be here listening.
Okay.
I will say that I'm working the EDA Step Four specifically for the first time. I've worked several 4 steps before, but I'm working that as we go through this right now. And I'm really excited because even though I found a lot of recovery from my behaviors and a lot of the thought processes that I was stuck in before from the 4 steps I have done, as soon as I read the EDA Big Book, I noticed that there were these categories that I really needed to flesh out, and I hadn't had anybody ask me about them before. So categories like shame and confusion, which for me are such a big part of my eating disorder or how it shows itself, and so much of the chaos that gets in the way of me being happy, joyous, and free. So I feel like just, and also as like Annette was saying, I did get bogged down a lot by what I felt like I was doing wrong. It was very sort of like, the word selfish was like my favorite word to use when I did my first 4-step inventory. So I like that this one is a little bit more catered to sort of my psyche. So I'm looking forward to working it. And when I will say, the only other thing I'll say is that when I worked the 4th step, when I really, really went back through it after working my 5th step and everything, I finally understood what it meant when it said in the Big Book that like we see what the root of our troubles is. I never understood how the root of my troubles were in my resentments. That just didn't make any sense to me. And when I was finally able to see the patterns in my own way of thinking and behaving that created situations that then gave me troubles, those were my troubles, then that was a pretty big revelation. So hopefully any of that made sense. And again, I'll be listening. So I'll pass.
Thank you, Emily. Michelle, I'm going to save you to talk about the resentment example, but I do want to talk briefly about the layout. So if you turn to page 6 in your worksheets, you're going to see that we're laying out brainstorming. We're going to do brainstorming first. So if you look on page 6, it lists out how to think about people, institutions, and principles, the sources with whom we're angry or against which we have resentments. So we lay out 5 columns. So who or what caused whatever it is, whether that's resentment or self-pity. We have resentments. Like, I had resentments against the college that I went to school at. I had resentments against, my employers. I had resentments against, the government at times. But the cause, the reason or the cause, why we felt the emotion at risk affects that's the 3rd column. So this is the thing, we're laying out a notebook that has 5 columns. So the simplest thing to do is to take a notebook, open it up, and you'll see an example of this actually if you turn to page 10. That's the first example we have where it's got all 5 columns. The source, the reason, the cause, at risk, affects my error, my part, and the resolution, which is the 5th column. So those are the columns that we're going to be covering in this exercise of the workshop. And we're going to go through the resentment tonight as the example of the first of the 8 topics. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the source or cause means. And so, you know, that's usually a name. It's usually a person. It might be ourselves. It might be a parent. It might be a spouse. It might be a child. It might be your boss. Just like it lays out in the AA text, you know, we lay the person, put the person's name down. And then underneath that, to the right, you've got another column which talks about the reason or cause why we felt the emotion. So we're not going to get into that just yet. We're going to talk about how we lay this out as a first step. And then we're going to talk about the brainstorming process. Brainstorming is where we're actually just kind of like listing everything that brings that emotion to mind. So when we think about resentment or fear or self-pity or shame, guilt or harm's done, confusion, frustration, despair, we're going to take each one of those separately. Tonight, between now and next Thursday, we're going to talk really just about resentment. Now, one thing I want to caution you about is that sometimes going through step 4 can feel like you're just like laying yourself, like you're flaying yourself so you've got like no skin. So if you're feeling like that, it's normal. It feels raw, okay? And so that part of step 4 can feel really uncomfortable. Know that you're going to need to be extra gentle with yourself and just take some extra, take some steps to make sure that you have things to do for self-soothing, for comfort. Have people that you can talk to about this if you don't have somebody to talk to when it makes you feel really uncomfortable. Because until you've gone through the process of defining a resolution and going through the steps to make yourself to feel prepared to actually enact the resolution, it's not a fun time. It just isn't. So I don't want you to feel alone or like I feel like a small child oftentimes. It's hard for me to engage in adult behaviors, like, specifically if it's about sex. Having relations with my husband is just difficult when I'm going through a 4-step. And so, he already knows, a 4-step. But, I don't want to make light of that too much. I mean, the main thing is that we do, kind of reduce ourselves a little bit in this process so that we can grow stronger and more resilient. And I have never come out of this process feeling less than I was before. Honestly, it is worth the effort and it is worth the pain. However, okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about brainstorming. So the key thing is for each one of these topics, we look at people, institutions, and principles. So when you're thinking about resentments, one of the ways that we talk about that and so bringing that up is just kind of like to think about people, and this is on page 141, we think about family members, former relationships, past and current friendships, jobs. It might be helpful to look at your cell phone, social media. So again, there's things in there that you might not be about a specific person. Doesn't matter. If it brings up a sense of resentment, put it down on paper, on the brainstorming part. Okay, now you might have hundreds of things that show up on that brainstorming part. Limit it, time box it, and give yourself 10 or 15 minutes. If it doesn't crop up after a review of your social contacts and you're racking your brain of things that cause you resentment, that's probably enough. Okay, you don't need to keep like mining that for treasures. If it's a big deal, it'll come up in your next 4-step. It'll show up in your 10th step. So institutions, again, you might want to think about, well, tax season. If you're self-employed, that's 4 times a year at least. So, that comes up. Or just don't worry. Principles can be confusing. So we think about principles. You might want to think about things like the idea of love at first sight. Maybe that incites resentment is against people that are fond of that idea, or racism, or prejudice, or sayings such as honesty is the best policy. It sounds so smug. Or you live under my roof, you follow my rules, or fake it till you make it. These are all notions or ideas with which we can have resentment. So make sure you think about that stuff as well. The next column is reasons or causes, and we list the reasons we were upset. So why is it? So now we don't think about that in the brainstorming part at all. We wait until we pick out the things that are like the top 10 items on the brainstorming list for each category. We're not going to do all categories at once. It's just too much. But when we go back through, we're going to pick out the top 10 in the categories and work on those first. Because you know what? My mother might show up on that list, but maybe she shows up in 50 different ways. So It's important for us to pick out patterns, and when we get to the reasons or causes, we'll be breaking things down into more granular, specific instances that bring up feelings of resentment or feelings of self-pity or frustration, despair. So brainstorming is really about listing things out. The reasons or causes we list out, like why we were, like if I'm resentful at my mother, it might be because she just won't listen to what I think she should do next. Like, so I was just at my mother's before, and she's a sweetheart. I love her dearly, but she just did something that landed her in a position where I had to go like rescue her. So that was uncomfortable, but then she did not want to talk about it. She did not want to admit why she pushed the emergency button and got admitted to a facility. So from my perspective, that is you know, I don't necessarily get a right, you know, she has to grant me that trust to listen to whatever my opinion might or might not be. And if she doesn't want to listen to it, that's totally on her. And but it brought up resentment. You bet it did. So why? Well, because so we can break that down, but I'm not going to do it right now. So we look at the reasons or causes, and we list each one of those separately. Okay, so you might have your mother down, but there might be a whole lot of things that fall under that. Like my kid is disrespectful and he's using my money and he's, you know, so there are lots of different reasons why somebody might show up. At risk or affects my. In that third column, we write, again, very similar to the AA text. We really look at whether our self-esteem, pride, ambition, finance, security, sexual or intimacy needs, or family or social relationships have been affected. So we describe these on page 143. So self-esteem affects, and hang on, I'm just going to page down through that. So I think, no, I don't have a separate thing on that. But so self-esteem affects the way we feel about or value ourselves, self-regard or self-respect, our dignity and composure, as well as our self-esteem. Pride is about the pleasure that we take and joy that we find in our achievements, possessions, or character. Pride can feel like self-esteem, but it contains the seeds of a brittleness, a kind of an arrogance that can interfere with our ability to connect empathetically with other people. So pride is not, you know, it's like you can have pride in your possessions, but that kind of that edge that you get where you're kind of like, it's better than something. That part is not helpful to others or to relationships. Ambition includes the desire for reward, recognition, or validation. So it can be long-term, like dreams or ambition for jobs, finances, or education, but they can also be short-term stuff, like to be included or respected in relationships with friends and so on. And I'm gonna need to move past these pretty quickly. So finances is basically anything related to our economic base. So our job security, our stability of any kind, and security pieces are specifically really like health, safety, food, clothing, home, transportation. And you know what, sometimes the change itself threatens security. So frankly, this 4 steps threatens my security. I'm sorry, but I like things like they are, kind of, because they're safe and comfortable, even if I know that they're killing me. All right, sexual or intimacy needs includes relationships of trust and mutuality that enable us to care for ourselves and others. And social relationships cover connections with members of our current families, families of origin, friendships, coworkers, anybody in the community, organizations, institutions. So threats to these relationships can include anything that relates to integrity and trust, such as with sexual relationships, but they may also involve external factors such as institutional or cultural bias, social expectations or prejudice, and slander. So these are really fairly complex ideas that, you know, so when you're talking about at risk or threatens, you know, and what's affected, these things in the third column, they can go pretty deep, and you'll find that they tend to form patterns that repeat. The fourth column is my error or my part, and this is where that selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, and afraid stuff comes up. But the key parts are really about how we are left vulnerable. Okay, so when we're depending on others and looking for others for validation, that is exposing ourselves to something that may feel intimate, but actually maybe is an overdependence on others to give us those strokes. And so we need to be kind of careful there, because we're supposed to, as it says in the AA text, lean on God and walk with people. What that really means, and it took me so long to figure that out. but I can't look to my husband, even the people that I really expect to give me those strokes of validation. You know, if I'm really dependent on that, and that's my main source of how I develop my self-esteem, that's unfair to him. It's unfair to these other people. I'm putting expectations on them that prevent me from loving them fully as they are. So I need to be really careful about that stuff. So anyway, my error, my part might have a lot to do with expectations. And we talk about that on page 145. The next thing that we brought up is the resentment prayer. So this is a key thing, and I'm hoping that somebody else mentions it. I'm going to turn to Michelle. But areas to consider, it describes self-seeking, selfishness, dishonesty, and fear in detail on pages 146 and 147. And that's where I'm going to wrap up my contribution on this. Michelle, if you would be so kind to talk about your example, this is where we'd like to turn it over. Michelle, go ahead and take it.
Michelle. Yeah, thanks. I first of all, I needed, like, I didn't feel like I was going off into the corner to retreat into a hole and to do this work, you know, so I had lots of cheerleading from my sponsor, you know what I mean? And lots of guidance. And I really wanted to say that because it was kind of like it takes a village, right? It wasn't just me out there doing this by myself. And I did really like the brainstorming part because I got to like put down, and short-sighted, put down where I got to feel wrong, right? Finally, somebody, you know, but knowing that I was going to take a deeper look at it. So that was kind of a fun. I let myself kind of have fun with that. Resentment for me really means refeeling stuff. So sometimes I get angry about stuff and the energy goes through me. And you know, oftentimes my emotions can be right sized to life now, at least more than before. But certainly, you know, the resentment was stuff that kept chewing on me, to use the phrase. My mind would chew on me when I was stuck in traffic. It was the stuff that I would think about. So when I actually did this writing, you know, I picked my husband as an easy example, and he's a sweet guy. And we moved down here. We had a big move, and you know, and at the time I was kind of like trying to get my feet firmly planted on the ground. I was in the middle of a 4-step. A lot of stuff had been brought up. And, you know, to me, in my mind, it's like, here's my husband. He's the person who's supposed to be here for me. We just moved. You know, I'm not going to make any friends. I'm going to just rely on my husband. And I was dumping all this stuff on him. And it was stuff that he was unable to handle. I mean, he was worried about me, but he was also dealing with his own stuff. You know, to me, I wrote down, you know, my big resentment about him, and I had several, and I wrote separately on each separate issue, right? Because the idea is to be able to look at the patterns. And so for me to really look at the patterns, I needed to separate it out. So my being resentful about my husband going fishing when we needed to unpack the house or whatever, which he didn't do, but it was very different than the example now, where he became anxious when I shared my struggles and didn't want to hear it. And, you know, that affected my self-esteem, my pride, my ambition, security, sexual intimacy needs, family or social relationship. And then I had, you know, I felt alone and didn't want to reach out to anyone, you know, and my part. So I like looking at in terms of selfish behavior. I know variants on that. But, you know, I liked the idea of using him. I used him as my primary support over other people. And, you know, he also was dependent. He also was somebody who was supposed to love me, right? So I would go to him with this and expect him to be my everything, step up in all ways. And, you know, and for me, it's like I would just dump it on him and drop mini bombs. And it was when I needed to share is when I shared, and I was inconsiderate. I really didn't ask him whether he was open to hear about what he was going through. It was just all about me. And then when he was irritated with me, I would be a jerk. That was a selfish behavior. I'd be cold and aloof. I'd be punitive. I wouldn't talk to him for the rest of the day. The lie that I believed, it's just like any lie that relates to that. So for me, it was like talking to him is the way I can feel better, like as if my sense of okayness is something external to me, right? believing the lie that his well-being isn't as important as mine, believing the lie that he's my only option or even a good option, my self-seeking motives, that I used his reactions about being irritated in order to justify treating him poorly. And this is one of my favorite things to do as a sick and suffering person. I love to blame others and I can justify anything of mine. And luckily I don't have to do that anymore. But, you know, one of the great things about blame for me is that I used to be able to use it most importantly to avoid looking at my part and taking responsibility for my own well-being. So like instead of trying to reach out and build friendships with people, and I do have another 12-step, you know, fellowship. So, I mean, I had access and people were inviting us out and stuff, but, you know, that was a risk and that was scary. And it was opening myself up to somebody who might have given me constructive feedback, right? Lots of fears there. And, you know, and coming down to the fact that we were in a situation that was new, and I was afraid that I wasn't going to make new friends, that I wasn't worth listening to, available, that I wouldn't find people were here for me. But I think a lot of what happens for me with the writing is that, you know, it always comes back for me. I'm always seeking the source of my okayness and well-being outside of myself. And the truth is that the source of that is inside of me. And it's not me, but it's my relationship with my higher power. And, you know, I don't really know what that means, but I have faith and I believe that that is the key. And it's scary to not be able to point at something or someone and say, that's the reason why I'm not okay. Or if only they were that way, then I'd be okay. And to really have the solution be to focus on my recovery. And I love the resolutions. I love that. And I love thinking of how I would view things. The resolution was like, how can I resolve this now? And then the idea of what will I do next time? And in this case, my resolution was to work on myself, writing and work, and to reach out to other people who might make good friends and then follow up with them. And then how would I approach this in the future if something similar happens again? Apologize for dumping my stuff and being inconsiderate. Talk with a sponsor, friend, or therapist about constructive solutions. So, I mean, like, that's kind of the way I kind of wrapped it around. And I really like, for me, it's really, really useful if I think in terms of selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and afraid, in terms of my selfish behavior, dishonest thinking, self-seeking motives, and fears. And what you didn't really get a lot of was the drill down of fears I try to do. But that way, I at least feel that I'm covering all my bases. My 10th step is very different. Like, I wrote stuff down from the book on step 10, but I still like to try to, like, write a little bit, all right, where's my selfish behaviors? So those are kind of the 4 things that kind of, like, help ground me in my writing. But once I get through that, I automatically have to look at, what's the resolution now? What can I do now? What's the solution now? And then next time when this comes up, what's the plan? What's the plan B, right? What's the next choice? And, you know, the thing that I found is that this is a beautiful journey of discovery. It's brainstorming not only resentments, but brainstorming options of different ways to react, right? And so I get to embark on this journey of trial and error, where everything's possible. And I think one of the miracles for me is that I get to discover what is the right fit for me, you know, and it's been one of the big lessons for me through this process has been that I just need to find out what is right for me, and that other people can have something that's right for them be different than what's right for me, and neither one of us is wrong. It's just fit for a reaction that doesn't fit for me. And so it's really been kind of magical, because I've found that a lot of the plans and next times that I've come up with have been uniquely comfortable. You know, that some of my friends aren't comfortable doing the same things that I would do, but to be able to discover a peace in my heart that's peace with a choice that I made, regardless of what other people think about it, is really an amazing gift. And to me, it's a result of inventory. So that's all I wanted to share on that.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And I know we're running out of time, but I really appreciate the specific details. And, it really is possible to come up with solutions to everything. So, my mother not listening to me threatened my self-esteem because, damn it, everybody should listen to me. That's crap. So honestly, my part is that I'm trying to impose my will on somebody else, which is selfishness. So if you look on page 146, it gives detailed descriptions of like self-seeking, looking to draw attention to ourselves, like being an advantage. Selfishness is being concerned with our own needs while ignoring the needs of others. So being considerate of others is always selfish, but not necessarily self-seeking. So when I'm wanting her to do it my way or to look at it my way, that's just selfishness. It's like, no, you know what? That's really not what's in her best interest, even if I think it is. And dishonesty is like me thinking that I know, because I don't. All right, I can only know what is mine. And I really don't live inside her head, even if I think I do. So, and fear is really that part. There were lots of fears that, it's like, I'm afraid my mother is not going to take care of herself if she doesn't listen to my sound advice. Well, you know what? She's an adult and she actually does still have all her mental faculties. So this idea of that being afraid of losing what we already have, or afraid of not getting what we want, or not being good enough, or afraid of the unknown, whenever that's the case, we react from a place of selfish protectiveness rather than a place of empathy and compassion. That is self-limiting, and it prevents us from the growth and creating the relationships of trust we really need to recover. So what is my resolution with my mother? Well, it's actually respect. It's me respecting her and her autonomy, and being grateful that she does have the mental capacity to make decisions for herself, even if she's not, because that's what I would want people to do for me, and it's what she wants for herself. So with that thought, I know we don't really have time to do a whole lot else. Today we're going to talk about the assignments now for October 18th. Please read workshop worksheets pages 6 to 9, brainstorm on resentment for page 6, asterisk at the top of page 10, and do the resentment inventory on pages 10 and 11. So the key things we were doing here is to make sure that just get through that resentment inventory. You've got 2 full pages if you want to do 10 and 11. You don't feel obligated like you have to fill them out completely. Do your best. If you have questions, please bring them for next time. We'd love to hear, like, if you're stuck on something, you can be confident that somebody else is too. So please, I know that this is, we're short on time. There's another meeting coming in right at our heels. We do take a 7th tradition here in the room. We're going to pass a mailbox kind of a thing. If you're online, please do join us at www.foreda.org. There's a tab there for PayPal. Contribute as you can. We really do appreciate your willingness to step up and help others, because that's what we use the money for. All right, so with that thought, we're going to close with, we'll pick the witty version of the Serenity Prayer, our old standby. So thank you, everybody, and here we go. On count of 3, you *6 or Alt-8 to unmute. God.
God,
me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things we can,
the things I can,
wisdom to know the difference.
and to know the difference.
Keep coming back. It
Keep
works.
coming back.
Work
It works.
it. Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Right.